Welcome to the Growth Whisperers, where everything we talk about is building enduring great companies. Companies that will last, companies that will endure, and that we'll all be proud to watch grow through their journey. My name is Brad Giles, joined today, as always, by my co-host, Kevin Lawrence. Hello, Kevin. How are things today?
Things are great. I know I say that every week, but they generally are. Just had a birthday recently, which was I'm not the biggest fan of birthdays, but it's I don't like things that are so much about me, but I had a great time with some family and friends. It was good. And again, we're in the middle of our summer and life is good. I mean, sunshine where we live in British Columbia, Canada is a great thing. Lots of chances to get out. I just love that it's bright in the morning.
Yeah.
And, and getting outside when it's bright out is one. Anyway, life is good. Life is good in the hood. That's where I'm at. How about you?
Good.
How's things in your neck of...
Good. I went on a plane, which may not seem may not seem unusual to you, but it's a bit of a new concept again here. Went over to Sydney for a couple of day workshop with a team there, so it was pretty good to get back in the groove. And I got back to the hotel and I was like, you know what? I actually remember. I like this stuff. This is good fun. So yeah, all is good here. We like to start, as we advocate clients do, with a word or phrase or subject of the day. What might be on your mind at the moment, Kev?
Well, mine's similar to yours about getting on an airplane, and it's this magical thing called cocktail hour. And, when we get to do these meetings in person, they work on Zoom. You just don't get the social time. But when you get to do these meetings in person, what I'm finding is, you get time where you sit and you'll have a drink and sit and chat before dinner. And then you have a dinner and you socialize. And it's, cocktail hour to me is similar to having a coffee. As you sit down, you have a chat, you catch up with these executives, in my case, executives that I work with all around the world and what's going on in life and with them. And it's just the magic of cocktail hour that only happens when you're physically there together.
Oh, interesting. Well, mine is about the opposite of cocktail hour. It's about a marathon. Yeah. And so if you were going to run a marathon, you'd probably think, I've got to have quite a lot of water to drink. But that's our intuition. But in actual fact, no one's ever died of thirst in a marathon. But inversely, a lot of people have died from drinking too much. They go to the
wrong
stops.
Type of water.
Yeah, they go to the stops, if there is stops, and they carry too much. Yeah, a lot of people have actually died from drinking too much, but no one's ever died of thirst. So that's what's on my mind.
Interesting. I have a family member, extended cousin, who was qualifying for the Olympics. I think it was the LA Olympics in '86. Mm-hmm. And wherever she was doing the qualifying race, it was somewhere that wasn't used to having marathon races, like somewhere that it just wasn't common. And they gave the runners ice water. Oh. And for a marathon runner who is running full tilt, apparently ice water is a bad thing because it shocks the body and it can lead to all kinds of other things. Anyways, the story in the family, and whether it's the real deal or not, I don't know, but it was that they basically, because they gave her ice water and she drank it, it screwed up her system and gave her cramps or whatever it gave her. It's because it wasn't the right type of fluid. Interesting, kind of fitting into what you're saying. So if she knew what you knew, maybe she didn't drink the water, she would have been fine. Very interesting.
I'm
so a marathon, I got it, Brad. I got it. It's a marathon cocktail hour. How's that for fun?
Yeah,
we've had a few of those.
Look, mate, I set you up so well there regarding the 20-mile march. It was just on a silver platter. So I
know.
Yeah,
I know. It is a perfect transition. I know, but I was thinking about cocktails, Brad. But yes. I've got a great idea. That's a beautiful transition into today's show, Brad, where we talk about the 20-mile march.
Don't let anyone say you're not a professional.
No, I'm absolutely not a professional. That's for sure. I'm just here having a good time. I saw it coming, but then I got distracted by how I could weave those two. I did see it coming, but I didn't. Yeah, whatever. I got distracted. All right. So the idea of this week's show is the 20-mile march from Jim Collins in his book, Great by Choice.
Yeah.
And it's really equivalent to, what is the equivalent output you can do consistently over time. And, some people could run a marathon every day, but more people are likely to be able to hike or march 20 miles every day. And that's what we'll get into. And the whole idea of this show, and, last week we talked about episode 119, another Collins concept, the SMAC list, another list that gives you disciplines to help you make good decisions on an ongoing basis. And in both, he looked at the 10Xers, companies that outperformed similar companies in very turbulent times, which is, for many, what we find ourselves in right now. So 20-mile march was another piece of that book. And I love this principle because, and I pulled some stuff off Jim's site, and he was saying, and he just talks about how in chaotic times, everything's out of your control.
Yeah.
And right now, inflation, out of our control. Supply chain issues, out of our control. Pandemic, completely out of our control. Global shipping rates for some companies, out of our control. Oil and gas prices, out of our control. Interest rates, staff shortages, interest rates. Like, it's actually most things, a lot of things are out of control right now. It's not just that it's out of our control, it's also a little out of control. And the idea in discipline is controlling what you can control. And the 20-mile march is one of those things. Go ahead, Brad, jump in there.
Here's a quote from Jim Collins. I saw him in Melbourne, and he said this quote, and it hit me so hard that I think every single workshop that I do, I show it. And this is his quote: "The signature of mediocrity is not unwillingness to change. The signature of mediocrity is chronic inconsistency." Okay. And so what he said is that the sample companies or the comparison companies, they would change regularly. Okay. But the ones that win, what he called the 10Xers in Great by Choice, they were willing to change. Okay. But they were consistent about everything they did. So that's talking to a degree to the 20-mile march, saying it doesn't matter what happens. This is what we're going to do in this time period, and we're not going to change.
Yeah. And that consistency is the core discipline for lots of successes in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
And he gets into one specific piece here with the 20-mile march. And the idea of this is that it's a rigorous performance target to hit with great consistency, like hiking or marching across the country 20 miles a day. Jim tells a story that when we were doing a session with him once about his wife, Joanne, and she did a cycling trip across North America with some girlfriends. And to make this principle work, they pre-booked their hotels at the intervals that they wanted to ride every day and planned their entire route. And what that meant was, on the days when they were feeling great, they had an easy day, and they would have there and be able to have a great time. And on the tough days where they had to grind it out in the rain and the thunder or whatever it happened to be, they had rough days, but they still hit their mark week after week after week after week. And it's that discipline and that consistency that makes companies run really, really well. The key is you have to do it over a very long period of time. In many ways, the theory that I kind of have is that, the 20-mile march in many ways is connected to your flywheel, and it consistently speeds up your flywheel. And if you stop putting power to the flywheel, it can slow down. And the 20-mile march is in many ways like a mechanism to fire up your flywheel. So the idea of this is the consistently marching at a pace, not too fast, not too slow, to ensure that you don't overdo it or underdo it. And interesting, as planning a road trip this summer, and also thinking about the same thing, because I have a tendency to drive too far. So on a road trip, I'll be like, I have this anticipation of getting there, which fits into my personality in life. But in that case, you're bombing down a road, and I like to drive fairly quickly. You can miss a bunch of the great stops along the way because you're in such a hurry to get there. But once you're there, some of the good stuff can be behind you. So same thing is that we're going to book the hotels, and we were actually looking yesterday at pacing out. Okay, well, that would be about 6 hours of driving, because we want to do a pretty long road trip.
Yeah.
And 6 hours of driving, we figured, is probably the right amount. because you're going to stop and have lunch somewhere, and you got breaks, and there's going to be traffic. So it's just a good, solid pace. So we're kind of doing, what can we do in 6 hours a day to make it a great trip so that it's not too excruciating, and that we actually get enjoyment and don't, destroy ourselves in the process. So that's the overall thoughts around 20-mile march. Brad, what would you like to add in there?
Well, that's not too dissimilar to the actual concept. The 20-mile march comes from a comparison of two teams who were trying to be the first to reach the South Pole, going obviously back many, many decades ago. And
1911 to be exact. I got the notes off Jim's source material. 1911, exactly when that happened.
Yeah, and one of the teams had the discipline to march 20 miles no matter the weather. So nice fine day, they're not going more than 20 miles. They're going only 20 miles. Terrible blizzard, they're getting out of their tents, packing up in the blizzard and still marching 20 miles. So it doesn't matter what's happening. We're going 20 miles. The other team, the comparison team, nice fine day, let's push for 40 or 50 miles. And then in a terrible blizzard, let's stay in our tents perhaps. We will go out when it's good and then we'll push through. Now, of course, we know that the 20-mile march team made it. They were the first to the South Pole and then made it out and, were celebrated as heroes when they got home. The other team who didn't march 20 miles every day, but surged when they could, they all died.
Yeah, I think at least, yeah, exactly. And they did get there. They just didn't make it back.
Yeah.
And there was many other things that happened in that. And it's basically in many ways protecting you from your ego or from youthful exuberance that can get the best of you at times.
Yeah.
Right. It's not that you're not capable sometimes of pushing harder, but you can kind of wear yourself down. And those people you're talking about were Amundsen and Scott, I think, were the two explorers. Yeah, medicine. That's how you pronounce. I knew there was a way to pronounce it. I've got my notes here. And the other interesting things too, just in this, and those, those stories include some other principles from Great by Choice. But I also remember like the discipline that they had to do that 15 or 20 miles every day and march there. And even at the end, when they were getting close, and Amundsen, they thought Scott might be ahead because they had word that he was trying to get there first and they wanted to get there first. And the team's like, we can do 25 miles a day. We might be able to do more. We could push more and assure that we win. And Amundsen said, nope. And they consistently did their 15 to 20 miles every single day and they maintained their pace.
Yeah.
Underneath that is the thinking of like, we don't want to overdo it.
Yeah.
Because if you go too hard, you're going to, and inconsistently, you're going to wear the system, you're going to wear yourself down.
Yeah.
Right. And you could wear yourself down and you leave yourself more open to be vulnerable if things go wrong. If you just had a 30-mile day and then the next day is a storm, you could get in a lot of trouble. It's not a great choice. So there's other interesting thing about Amundsen that I really loved is that on this journey, he practiced eating and living on seal blubber. Basically, if you're running out of food, there's big fat seals, but the stomach and the system is not used to eating those kinds of things. So he tested eating different things. He did all kinds of other things to assure success. So the main thing is, so that story is a great story, Brad, and thanks for opening up with that. The other thing about this is really it's about, the second point is about self-control. Because generally, more companies will die of indigestion than they will of starvation. Generally, they grow too fast, they make a big freaking mess, and then they wonder why the growth stops and the company get in trouble. They get overextended, they get over something, and then they get in trouble. They get the businesses in trouble. It's not because there's not enough opportunity. There's always an abundance of opportunity. You just got to stay disciplined.
It's about enduring.
It is. And it's a long game. It's not a sprint. And you hear people all the time, oh, no, we got to be the first to market. No, you need to be good and you need to be there long-term. Like right now in turbulent times, you got to be there on the other side of the valley that happens in the economy.
Yeah.
Right. That's all, you got to be good. You got to be a good, solid operator moving towards great. and you got to be there on the other side. You don't necessarily need to do anything insanely fast or kill yourself. You got to sustain, not sprint.
Yeah.
So yeah, the self-control is a really big piece. Anything you'd like to add in there, Brad?
Look, I go back to the original, the statement I said. The signature of mediocrity is chronic inconsistency. 30 miles, 5 miles, no miles, 50 miles. And compared to that, the analogy is 20 miles every day. And that's what we're advocating. This is how one wins. It's consistency, stability versus sprint and recover.
Yeah. So interesting, like, one of the companies that I work with, their 20-mile march is also connected to directly to one of the pieces of their flywheel. Yeah. And it's the number of salespeople that they have in the company. Yeah. And what we realized at a certain point, going back 5 years with this company, is the number of salespeople wasn't growing. And as a result, our revenues weren't growing enough and profitability. So now we have an obsession with the number of salespeople that we hire, promote, develop, train, all the work that we do. And that is one of our number one numbers we track in the business, because it's their army strength. And we drive it like crazy. It is the 20-mile march. It's one of our number one objectives every year, that we know that the growth of our sales team is the growth of our company. And it's the most critical discipline that often wanes normally in the past when we get busy and people let it fade. So
you might look at it, just to discuss that for a moment, and say, currently we've got a sales team of 40. This time next year, we need a sales team of 48, which is, we're going to add 2 salespeople net per quarter. And then we're going to grow it. And so this time next year will be 48 people. This is the average budget. This is how we make it. Yeah. And
with those numbers that you used, we have a target of where we're always working 3 years out. Yeah. In that case, the number would probably be, if we're at 40, it'd probably be like 100. Yeah. So we're marching towards 100 from our base of 40, which is one of our key disciplined drivers of our growth. Because without that, it doesn't work. So self-control is key. The next thing around the 21 March is it builds a lot of confidence, because you consistently win. You consistently achieve it because you're consistent. It's not a massive win and then a horrific loss. It's a stable system, and stability in lots of different ways builds confidence in the system, confidence with your colleagues, and allows you just to stick to your work because you believe you're going to win. Yeah. I've mentioned to you on this podcast before, the state in which I live is predominantly a mining state, and that state is driven by cycles. So at the moment, I think the iron ore price is probably the primary driver of all finances in the state. It was as high as $240 and as low as $30 per ton in the past 4 or 5 years, right? So you can imagine the massive changes. So when it's high, mining companies are making big investments. Nothing matters apart from getting the tons out. Yep. And the opportunities seem boundless. And when it's dry, when it's really low, it's really, really tough. And so the smack applies in that environment. And the way that I've worked in clients that are in mining services or whatever it is we're saying we've got to keep our eye on the longer term, the consistency, because you can get caught up in the euphoria of the moment. Yes. And if you overinvest when the time is high, you're going to get the crap beat out of you when the market falls. And then you won't be able to invest properly in the next cycle because you get really, really damaged. Whereas if you consistently invest when the market goes incredibly high, you're not going to fall as far. Like it's discipline through chaos. Yeah. And it's a great example, Brad, is that, companies that get too caught up in that, then when it falls, they fall with it and they end up very weak when they fall. Yeah. Yeah. It's the consistency that really matters, because everything goes up and everything goes down. There is surging demand. It's just this constant battle between supply and demand
that drifts one way or the other. And we've got to endure through that.
So why is it critical to have this kind of governor on your growth, to not grow too fast? Because when the money's showing up at the table, a lot of people have a hard time not grabbing it now. So why is it dangerous to grow too fast?
Because we're human beings and we have emotions, and you know, our brain is just a wet mess of meat that has electrical stimulus in it, and that means that you know, and a great deal of our brain is primal. Okay, and that drives us to want to gamble, to take risks, and you know, to not stick to the disciplines that make us actually succeed and get what we really want.
Yeah. So it's basically the 20-mile march is like, don't gamble on growth. Be consistent and disciplined. And, you know, we watch when people do take on too much business. Like if you're a business and you've got, you know, 300 or 400 employees and you double in a year or so, which I've got a client recently that did that. And they've miraculously done a spectacular job of it. But there's a cost to the organization. Yeah. Because when you go and double in size, often a bunch of your systems start to fail, whether it's management systems, back-end operational systems, or whatever it happens to be. Service levels often fall because it's hard to maintain quality. So, you know, a 20% growth per year, let's just say, is a sustainable growth a lot of organizations can do if they're dialed in. But at scale, 100% growth a year, you're going to implode yourself in almost every case. You can do it for a short period of time, but then you start to build up these debts in the system that you got to pay. And it really, really hurts. That's why companies will go and they'll grow and then they'll flatten out or crash because it's just too hard. The system just can't handle that quick of growth.
And the problem is, there's very few people like us who are talking about building enduring great businesses and focus on the boring basics. If you look to the business media, it's all BS, right? Talking about this company had 14,000% growth, or this company did this. Yeah. And it's all, they're only talking about the meteors in the sky and not the stars, if that makes sense. They're only talking about...
What a beautiful metaphor.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a bad one, but
yeah, I got it.
Yeah, right. They're only talking about these real outliers, and it's
which is not the way it's normally done.
Yeah, and I
saw this great article in the New York Times and this recently about this young Canadian artist who's 26.
Yeah,
and her paintings are selling for $1.4 million. I mean, it's a beautiful story, and I'm thrilled for her, and she has some really interesting art.
Yeah,
that's just how it happens. One time in 50,000.
Yep.
You know, for every 50,000 artists or 100,000 artists, there might be one of those at that age. But the point of it is, we love those stories. It's just generally not how it's done. And I'm thrilled for the people that it does. But building a great business is generally not one of those outliner events. It's core disciplines compounded over time.
And when the average executive or leader reads those stories on a regular basis, they can't help but be compelled to want to try for those types of things. But so many of those businesses crash and burn.
Yes, because you crash and burn your systems. You crash and burn your people because you overload. Everyone goes through growth spurts. We did it in our own firm recently too. And it's hard, and too much, too fast. Sounds good. You think you're going to make a whole whack more profit, and often you give a whole bunch of it back. So great thing. So let's get a few examples. So there's an example that Jim talks about from Stryker. And I'm going to give a simple example. It's a company in the US. And they decided, John Brown, the CEO, decided they would have a 20% net income growth year on year. Now, he also put a little bit of teeth into it. Anyone who was behind that 20% net income growth as the watermark, they said it's the watermark. So if you're below it, you needed a circle. And all of those people were given snorkels.
Snorkel, so like a diving snorkel.
A diving snorkel because you're below the watermark. So you would be awarded a snorkel. And even when they had their their annual chairman's breakfast, when they had their annual divisional reviews, you got invited to his table, the chairman, John Brown's table, if you were above the watermark. Everyone else just went for breakfast. They weren't in the room. They weren't invited in. They were basically social exclusion because they didn't perform. So I like the teeth in it. I mean, that's accountability. That's not everyone's culture. But if you're going to have the drive to grow net income 20% year on year, it's beautiful. By the way, I'm also thrilled to see when people are talking about growing net income or return on capital, not revenue.
Yeah,
revenue growth is a dangerous, undisciplined way of looking at most businesses. Gross margin growth, EBITDA growth or net income growth, return on capital growth, return on capital. Sustaining return on capital, but getting a higher number, which is generally tied back to your net or your EBITDA.
So if you were at Striker and you're turning up and you've produced a 40 or a 50% growth, you're not necessarily succeeding. That's the point.
I'm sure you would get a talking to of like, how are you going to sustain that? And why didn't you save some of that?
Yeah.
Why didn't you modulate your growth so that you could do it next year and the next year and the next year?
And that's what's so important in this 20-mile march discussion.
It is strength. You're building strength and it's like the flywheel speed. Don't speed it up too fast, consistently, discipline. So some other ones we've seen is EBITDA percent increase. One client is that they want their EBITDA percentage to go up year on year on year, the percentage, not the dollars. So it doubles down on the dollars.
But that would be consistent over many years. It'd be like a 1% per year or something like that, right?
Less than 1%, less than 1%. It's a less than 1% number.
Yeah.
And it's over many, many years.
So in 5 years, less than 1%, every single year, we get a feeling, and then everything comes back to that. But don't go too high and don't go too low. Be in that Goldilocks zone.
You got it. Cash, building up cash in the businesses and improving, whether it's cash flow or cash, we've seen. I've seen a really interesting one, which is dividends to shareholders. In privately held businesses, family businesses. One that I had heard about, this wasn't one of our clients, but someone else shared this with me, is that the dividends to the family, the shareholders, went up every single year. So, and that money was coming out no matter what.
Yep.
So the CEO and executive had to produce additional returns beyond that. So they had capital to reinvest because there was an accelerator on the stuff being sent out to shareholders.
Yeah.
I've seen it around new market openings, but it's often guardrails. It's like a min max, right? It regulates a speed, almost like it regulates so anyways, market openings.
I've seen that with retailers. So retailers can get into a buoyant market and they're going to open too many stores too fast in bricks and mortar stores. And it can strain their balance sheet. Whereas if they say, we're going to open one store per quarter or half, something like that, it may be more sustainable.
Yeah. And by the way, opening up new stores in retail, and often people I've seen it happen a lot of times. I did a lot of work in retail. People get exuberant. They get excited about it. And then they start opening up B stores and C stores because they're trying to do it too quickly and not doing the diligence or waiting for the good locations.
Yeah. Yeah.
New product releases, about how new products will get released and continually, or an existing product there'll be constant mini releases.
And that's what is
constantly improving.
That's what they do in software a lot. It's like every week or every fortnight, whatever it is, we're going to do a sprint and we're going to have the next version and the next version.
Yep. Constant releases. Return on capital growth, as I had mentioned, revenue growth, which can be a dangerous one depending on the business model. And a real estate development group I work with is the development square footage. Is that we're going to expand the square footage that we develop at a certain pace, and we're not going to go too fast or too slow. And all of these things. I mean, the idea here is it's putting parameters on the growth. So, sometimes executive teams will want to slow it down and make it easier to hit their bonuses, right? And it's almost expectations set between the executive team and sometimes shareholders of what is the pace of growth that we're going to have, and what is that marker that we're going to watch. Is it the people that we hire? Is it the markets that we enter? Whatever it happens to be. Is it the profitability of certain pieces? Whatever it happens to be, it's just, how are we going to set those disciplines in place to consistently bring the best out of us and make sure that we get stronger and stronger as we grow?
Because just like people, companies, become weaker or can die from trying to consume too much or do too much.
Yeah, exactly. You remind me of just a big dinner that we had the other night, and the 20-mile march. It's like when you have a dinner that's really, really good and you just eat too much, right? That's not a great thing. And it would almost be if you had your most important day of work tomorrow, and you didn't eat enough, or you ate too much, or you drank too much. It's going to set you up to be wobbly the next day, and you can't be your best. It's consistent discipline and not being excessive, and also not being too conservative too.
Yeah. And we circle back to the check-in about the marathon, right? If nobody's died from a lack of thirst, no one's died from not drinking enough during a marathon, but heaps of people have died from drinking too much. So we've got to maintain discipline.
Exactly. That's the 20-mile march. So thanks for listening. This has been the Growth Whisperers podcast. I'm Kevin Lawrence, and I'm here with my partner, Brad Giles. I'm in Vancouver, Canada. Brad's in Perth, Australia. To subscribe, if you haven't, please do subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and please share it with a couple of friends, other CEOs and execs that might benefit from this. For the video version, go to youtube.com, search The Growth Whispers. And to connect with us in our newsletters or the great content and resources on our websites, Brad's is evolutionpartners.com.au, and mine is lawrenceandco.com. Hope you have a great week, and hope you continue to march towards where you want to get, and ideally towards your version of greatness. Have a great one.